remember when you're remembering an event. And the main crux of it is that when you're remembering an event in the real world, it of course is a very rich memory that crosses all of the boundaries that we've tried desperately to form to this point. So it's still worth recognizing what a semantic memory is, what an episodic memory is, but then recognize that when we're actually remembering in the real world, it's everything combined together. And this then is evidence of that combination, of that combining of all of these in one. The assumption is that when we're looking at somebody else's picture of the Eiffel Tower, for instance, we're getting a semantic memory of that. We're getting the facts. We're getting the lines. There's visual processing. There's some memory going on. There's, maybe you even remember being in Paris sometime and whatnot. But when it's your own, for whatever reason, there's just a richer retrieval process that occurs, and this is representing that process. So for most of the rest of class, though, we're not going to talk about autobiographical per se. There isn't that much more to say about it than that. But we're going to talk about how memories can go awry when we misremember things, why we misremember things, and how we misremember things. And so Daniel Schachter, who's possibly one of the sort of fathers of modern day memories investigation, memory research, has written a book in which he's said that there are 7 sins of memory. And what he really means is there's 7 ways in which memory can go astray. And so he has these 7 listed here. These are not in your textbook. So much of what we talk about today is, but this is not. So I guess listen. But it is all over. It is all over the web. If you really need a refresher, you can find it somewhere. But the 7 sins are the transience, absent-mindedness, blocking, misattribution, suggestibility, bias, persistence. They can be grouped into 3 broad categories. Sins of omission, meaning that things have not been remembered, that should have been, things have been forgotten or not retrieved. Sins of commission, which suggests that certain things have been retrieved from memory that maybe aren't accurate. So misattributions, misremembering, false memories, and whatnot. And then persistence is a failure to forget, which there are certain things. A memory that is now proven to be incorrect, for instance, is a memory that possibly you should no longer hold on to. And persistence of that memory can sometimes be, it could be, just to give an example, you can think of rumination as a depressive process, whereby you're continually remembering your past failures, for instance, in a way that is probably maladaptive. That'll be just one example. But so sins of omission, we have transience, which is really just the process. It means that memories can be transient, which means that they can sort of come and go. But really what transience is referring to is the standard process of decay that we've been talking about through multiple lectures. And so transience refers to the gradual process of decay over time. Absent-mindedness is referring more to the attentional processes that are occurring during encoding. So if you're not paying proper attention at the time that a memory is formed, you are going to be less likely to remember that memory at the time of retrieval. Makes sense. Blocking refers to a process whereby one memory may prevent a second memory from forming completely. So really blocking is referring, whereas transience is referring to decay, blocking is largely referring to interference, as we've been talking about it through class. So when one memory maybe interferes with another, where one memory pushes the next one out, where if you recall, we did the sensory processing lecture where you'd have stimuli coming on the screen very quickly, and you weren't able to remember what was blocked off because the next stimulus affected your memory for the first one. Yes.
So is blocking the same thing?
I'll say yes. I mean, yeah, but for your purposes, yes. I mean, Daniel Schachter would probably be rolling over at his grave as I ruin his careful attempts at something very specific. But for our purposes, yeah, you can think of transience as decay. You can think of blocking as interference. There's subtle differences that are not important for us. For sins of commission, this becomes a little bit more self-explanatory in terms of face value, in terms of label. The misattribution refers to attributing the memory to a different source. So sometimes you remember something, but you can't remember where you remembered it from, where you heard it. And you may think, for instance, that you heard it from me, which would, of course, mean that it's 100% correct. And you instead actually, got it from the Inquirer, and which hopefully is less reliable. Suggestibility is we'll get into various examples of suggestibility, but advertising, for instance, can lead to increased suggestibility. We'll find we'll give some examples, some of which you probably know a little bit of from Psych 100, and maybe social psych even, for those of you who have taken that. But the implanting of false memories, for instance, would be a process of suggestibility. Is a sin of commission because it leads to the formation of a memory that perhaps either is partially or entirely not made up, but not factual, not part of the legitimate memory trace. And then bias refers to our use of prior experience and prior personality and attitudes and belief systems and whatnot that can color our memory for events. And we'll get to a couple of examples of how bias can present itself as well. I referred to persistence already. So we're not going to talk a great deal about transience, absent-mindedness, and blocking, largely for two reasons. One, they're perhaps a little bit more, well, I don't know if they're more obvious. The main reason we're not going to is because we already have, largely. Transience is decay. We've talked all about it. Blocking is essentially interference. We've talked all about it. Absent-mindedness is a matter of selective attention and allocation of attention. We've mostly talked all about it. So we're not going to talk a great deal about sins of omission. It also is perhaps a little bit more self-explanatory about how we forget information and what types of information we forget. Perhaps a little bit more interesting are these sins of commission, whereby we remember things that didn't actually occur. And how does that happen exactly? So we're going to focus primarily on sins of commission. This is, you guys are, because we have consolidated the class into, I'm going to see how many different ways I can use the word consolidation today. But because we've consolidated the classes, this class down because of the midterm having to be rescheduled and whatnot. The COG labs for this week in particular and next week are ever so slightly out of order. And so you guys haven't done this COG lab yet. So this is last year's COG lab. This is the one you're going to have done for next week. But the false memory test is a COG lab that evaluates the likelihood that you're going to remember false memories. And so what ends up happening, there's a list of words that are given, and you're supposed to try to remember these words. There are various types of distractors that are put in, and distractors are intended as words that weren't in the original list. So you're given a recall test afterwards, and you're asked to say yes or no, were these words actually part of the original list? And you have normal distractors, so for instance, the list of words could be like door, house, grass, sky, and then you'll have normal distractors, which are like fork, shoe, totally unrelated things. And then you'll have what they refer to as a special distractor, which may be window. And so door, house, carpet, whatever was all used as words in there. And then they throw the word window in as what they refer to as a special distractor. And at least in last year's COG lab, we'll see, now that I've probably ruined it for your presentation, but we'll see. But my guess is I haven't ruined it, because you can see just how robust an effect this is. In fact, last year, the special distractors were remembered to a greater extent than the words in the actual list. Now, not in any significant way. But you can see normal distractors, people were pretty good at remembering the original list, 80%, give or take, remembered what words were there. If it was totally unrelated, then people were exceptionally good, 95% likelihood of categorizing it as no. But these special words that weren't there at all, but were conceptually related to the words that were actually in the list, were remembered 81% of the time. And so this is an example of a false memory. This is an example of suggestibility. And so, but what it's also showing, it's an example of suggestibility, but what it's also showing is how suggestibility occurred in this case. It's important to recognize that the special distractor was related conceptually, semantically, to the actual words in the list. Further indication of the fact that we use meaning and whatnot to group things together. And then it demonstrates a little bit further that not only do we group them together in terms of their meaning to help us to process them and whatnot, but that formation of that memory, it's such a strong process that we use to group these things together semantically that it can actually lead to memory errors. Because when we go to retrieve, we're also retrieving categorically. And we say, window, it's part of the same category, must have been there. But it's even more, notice that it's even more than that, because if that was just what it was, if the process we went through was simply, window there, I don't know, it's conceptually related, it probably was. If that was the process, we would not see that high a number here. We would not see a number actually equivalent to, or even greater than in this case, to the original list words. You'd have to expect that there would be some people that would say, no, it wasn't there. And some people would be like, yeah, it probably was. And we'd probably get more like 40% or something here. The fact that we're actually getting 81, the fact that people are just as likely to remember that word as they are words that they are 100% completely sure of, like door that was there, indicates just further how strong this conceptual, this semantic grouping of concepts is for us. And so that grouping, while fantastic in terms of helping us to remember things and absolutely necessary for guiding us around the world, can at times lead us to false memories. Okay, so just a couple. Break time. I need to replace batteries. It looks like it's good timing anyway. So let's take 10. And I'm going to see how quickly I can get you guys out of here so that we can remain daylight when we get out of here. I'm going to shut this. Pause this.